What is up, everybody? My name is Cale Brock. I'm a filmmaker and a surfer, and this is How to Rip. Today, I want to talk about a very important topic because I receive dozens of messages about it every single day on social media and over on my other tutorial channel at Cale's Broccoli. And it's, which surfboard should I buy? This is how much I weigh. This is where I'm at. Tell me which surfboard to buy. Unfortunately, I can't tell every single person their unique needs, but I can teach you to formulate your own criteria that'll help you buy the perfect board. Well, first off, how do you know that you're on the wrong board or that your current board is holding you back and it's time to transition? Well, there are a few things to look out for. And if we have a look at this particular surfing session here, I had a student of mine who typically is a very good paddler, catches lots of waves, great takeoff, all these different things, but had a bit of a challenging session. Now, I found out halfway through the session that she was actually on a board that she doesn't normally ride. One that it was a backup board because her other board was dinged. And this particular board was only 2 liters in volume under her regular board, but as a result, her paddling and her ability to catch waves and thus her takeoff were all hindered quite dramatically. So there are little signs like that we can look out for that indicate that perhaps our current surfboard is holding us back. I see a lot of surfers in the intermediate level who surf for a long time, who have surfed their entire lives, but gradually over time their frequency of surfing has dropped and thus their fitness has dropped, but they haven't made a correlative board adjustment to suit that new level of fitness. So as a result, they start missing waves, their wave count goes down and thus their progression goes down and even their abilities go down over time. When is the right time to transition? When your board is too big rather than being too small or undergunned. You are overgunned, we might call it. I see way too many examples of this where surfers cut down that board size preemptively, and unfortunately it affects their paddling too much, it affects their ability to catch waves, and then they're just not ready. The only time where it's appropriate to actually shorten that whole board equation from a long board, a foamy, down to a shorter board is when you feel like your current board is holding you back. If your board is feeling cumbersome whilst you're riding those waves, perhaps your turns aren't as radical as you want them to be, then that is a sign that perhaps you could actually shorten that whole board equation. A big mistake though is making too drastic of a change. So going from something like an 80 litre foamy down to like a 30 litre shortboard, something that a lot of people see Julian Wilson or Kelly Slater or Mick Fanning riding and think, oh, well, they can ride it successfully, so can I. It's a big mistake, and I've made it before as well. What a lot of people need to do, I think, is to actually hold on to a lot of that volume, find an intermediary step, perhaps go to something like 40 litres or whatever, depending on the ideal formula for you, and keep that foam and keep that overall width in the surfboard in their transition so that they can still catch waves, that they can still paddle, and thus progress as surfers. Suffice to say, a suboptimal surfboard under your feet will drastically hinder your progression in the sport. So with that in mind, I wanted to let you know about my new online course. It's brand new, it's cheap, it's easy to go through, and it's called the Ultimate Surfboard Buying Guide. As I said before, I received dozens, I've probably received thousands of messages from people asking, hey, this is how much I weigh, this is where I'm at, which surfboard should I get? Impossible for me to answer those. What I can do is give you the tools, the formula that I use to independently create a criteria to find a surfboard which suits your individual needs. Now, I've linked the Ultimate Surfboard Buying Guide down below in the description, and I've also put the trailer for it at the end of this clip. I think it is the most comprehensive program that you can go through, an education that you can go through before buying your next surfboard. Now, a lot of you guys have been commenting, and full transparency, I really appreciate you guys being here. This online course is not for How to Rip. This is my own online course. A lot of you guys have commented that Ryan and I aren't filming together anymore, and we just can't film together because we are literally on opposite sides of the country, especially during lockdown. It's incredibly difficult. So essentially what we're doing is uploading independently to How to Rip. So anything that I'm promoting here, like my own channel, like the Ultimate Surfboard Buying Guide, is entirely my own. So it's my own enterprise. And similarly, anything that Ryan is promoting is his own enterprise. Just to be fully transparent with you guys, because we really appreciate you being here. So a huge consideration before buying your next surfboard would be, what sort of waves do you surf? This is a question that's not asked enough. Do you need to overall generate speed a lot of the time, or do you actually need to control speed? So I'll put it another way. Do you live in an area where the waves are mostly mushy and weak and maybe 2 foot or 3 foot, and you need to really work the wave to actually build up enough speed to do turns and maneuvers? Or do you live somewhere like Hawaii or Western Australia, or somewhere with really solid, powerful waves where it's more about controlling the speed that you're given from those waves as opposed to actually having to generate it all on your own? This will determine not only the overall shape of the board that you get, but the minute details. So things like concave, fins, also really important. You know, for instance, in big waves, the best tail might actually be a rounded pin, which lengthens the surface area of the board. And then that pin almost acts like an extra fin to help you control these bigger waves. These tiny little considerations can actually make a big impact on the outcomes that you experience in your local area. The next thing I want to talk about is, of course, really important. It's your ability level. What are your goals, and are they realistic? Are you being realistic about your ability level? It's sometimes a little bit hard to say. Very commonly, I actually have to bring people back down to earth when it comes to determining their own ability levels. Sometimes with other people, I actually have to elevate them and make them actually think bigger. And there are some key things to look for there. You know, are you cutting across? Are you trying maneuvers? These will place you in those 4 or 5 different categories: your beginner, your advanced beginner, your intermediate, your advanced intermediate, your advanced surfer, and your pro. Where you fit in that list, that hierarchy, is really important to know so that you can actually dictate and determine the perfect criteria for your board. And again, coming back to your goals, what are your goals? Do you just want to make surfing really easy and fun and you don't want to have to really push yourself? You're just there to have a great time. That's totally fine. On the flip side, do you want to go out and absolutely smash waves to pieces? You know, you've got to know what your goals are and where you sit in your desires. So if you want something easy and that's really your goal, fun and easy, then perhaps considering keeping more volume in your board overall, particularly under the chest, for instance, is a good idea. And in terms of shape, going for a more neutral, friendlier shape as opposed to anything with a hard or flat or extreme outline, nothing too rigid and sharp in its overall shape. And again, on the flip side, if you are after performance and that's your main goal, then perhaps we need to have a chat about tighter rails, tighter lines on the surfboard, harder shapes, you know, talking about different tails like swallow tails and rounded squares, or even going for something like a bat wing sort of setup, which is quite radical and offers a lot of performance, but obviously sacrifices some elements of balance and stability. These are things that we actually have to weigh up in terms of what we want from our surfboard. And of course, one of the last things that I want to talk about in this particular clip is how much do you weigh? This is going to have a massive influence on the amount of volume and buoyancy that you want in your board. And of course, buoyancy is measured in liters. So volume of a surfboard is an indication of its buoyancy. And pretty much the heavier you weigh, the more buoyancy, the more foam you need under you to actually float you. Now, what's interesting is that we can actually achieve different board shapes whilst keeping the same volume, and those different shapes are going to have different outcomes and different surfing styles and paddling styles on a wave. For instance, if we have a nice flat round sort of surfboard, we can expect that to paddle easier and potentially catch waves easier and go faster, but actually lack some potential in its performance value as opposed to something that has more concave, so it's less flat, it's more sharp in its outline, it's more of a traditional surfboard. We can expect that to be more performance inclined and less stability inclined. So these are just tiny little adjustments that we can make, but if you use your weight to actually calculate your ideal volume, that can be a very helpful step in determining the right surfboard for you. So if you've got a pen, I'm going to give you some insights from the Ultimate Surfboard Buying Guide. I'm going to give you the calculations that you can use to determine your ideal volume. So for beginner surfers, and again, the categories will define more in depth in the course. For beginner surfers, you can calculate your ideal volume by multiplying your weight in kilograms by 0.8. So let's say we have a 100 kilogram beginner surfer. We're going to say 100 kilograms times 0.8 equals 80. So 80 liters could be a good ideal volume for them to find in a surfboard. Advanced beginner surfers would be something similar, but obviously slightly less liters. Intermediate surfers, and I would say this is 80% of the world's surfing population, they can calculate their ideal volume by multiplying their body weight in kilograms by 0.45. So our 100 kilogram surfer would have an ideal literage of about 45 liters as an intermediate surfer. If we jump all the way up to advanced surfers, skipping the advanced intermediate surfers, you would have an ideal volume by calculating their body weight in kilograms by 0.34. So 34% of their body weight would be the ideal volume in number for you. So our 100 kilogram surfer would have an ideal volume of 34. Me, myself, as an 80 kilogram advanced surfer, would have an ideal volume of 27.2, which happens to be the volume that I carry in all my different surfboards, depending on what I want from them. So anyway, I hope that helped you guys. It's getting quite stroby in here lighting wise, so I better go. Those three considerations are really important for you to take on as you go to actually select and then buy your next surfboard. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. You can also join me on my other surfing tutorial channel at Kale's Broccoli, and you can join me on Instagram there as well. And don't forget, for the Ultimate Surfboard Buying Guide, the link is down in the description below. It's cheap, super easy, and really helpful in terms of helping you develop the perfect criteria for your next surfboard. A one-pager that you can take to any surfboard shaper or browse online with to get your next stick. Buying a board is not something to be rushed. You need to independently assess where you're at and use a formula to determine your needs. Too often I see surfers go into a board purchase with either no goals or very unrealistic goals, which results in a poor board choice, slow and poor progression overall. Where do you want to be ability-wise in the next 6 months to a year from now? I need to bring some of you back down to reality, and on the flip side, I need to encourage some of you to actually think bigger. Have a look at the board evolution and have a think about where you stand. I would much rather have an appropriate surfboard for 90% of my surfs than have one that is appropriate for only 10% of my surfs. They pick a highly advanced surfboard because they see someone like Kelly Slater riding it or Mick Fanning riding it, and yet this is probably one of the biggest mistakes that people make in surfing. For a small time investment now, you could save hundreds of painstaking hours further on down the track as you try to find the right board. Let's get it right now, shall we?